In 1462, a young Italian scholar by the name of Marsilio Ficino had just begun to translate Plato's dialogues into Latin. During the Middle Ages, most of these texts had been lost to the West, and when Byzantine monks fleeing from the fallen Constantinople took copies of them to Italy, Plato's rediscovery would be responsible for kick-starting the Renaissance. Ficino's patron was the powerful Cosimo de Medici, founder of the famous Medici family that would rule Florence during its ascent. And the young translator seemed to have all that he needed to complete the most important task of his life, until suddenly his work was interrupted by his patron, Cosimo himself, who wanted his protege to put Plato aside and give immediate priority to a different text altogether. But what could be more important than Plato, and the Renaissance for that matter? The answer can be found on a personal note that was left by Ficino in Latin. Mercurium per maximum prim, first, to translate the work of a strange Greco-Egyptian priest, known until then only as legend. Hermes Trismegistus. Ενίας μη ποτέ γενόμενης περί των όντων. Once, when my thoughts turned toward the true nature of beings and my mind soared to great heights, while my body grew heavy as before sleep, I saw an entity of immeasurable stature call me by name and ask, "What do you wish to know?" "Who are you?" I said. "I am Pimandris," he replied, "the higher intellect." And I, answering his question, said, "Μαθήν θέλω τα όντα. I want to know the nature of beings, and through them, to know God." "Then I will teach you," he said. Even rushing through these lines, Ficino must have been struck by the dramatic opening of this manuscript that he would eventually title Pimandris, after the name given by the text itself for the nous, or higher intellect, something perhaps akin to the mind of God, that appears to speak directly to its author, a name that in turn probably means Pimandron, shepherd of men. It was written in the Greek dialect of Alexandria, a city that flourished between the Hellenistic and Roman age, the centuries surrounding the time of Jesus Christ. Yet, the scholars of the Renaissance believed the original work to be much older. Because for all its empiricism, the Renaissance was steeped in magic and alchemy and strongly believed that anything of value must also be equivalently ancient. During the Middle Ages, fragments had circulated of some Greek original that told of a great man, a priest called Hermes Trismegistus, who could channel the powers of the stars. And so, when this very text, the Pimandris, was brought to Florence by Byzantine monks in the middle of the 15th century, an aging Cosimo believed that he had found the Greek source of this ancient legend, and was desperate to read it once before his death. But what is really contained in this text? For starters, the name Hermes does not refer to the Greek god, but to a man, a priest, of the Egyptian god Thoth, while Trismegistus means 3 times great, a title that was bestowed to him after his enlightenment. An entire group of ancient texts rediscovered in the 15th century have been classified as Hermetic, as if they were written by this Hermes, and circulate under this name ever since, as the Corpus Hermeticum. And since the Renaissance idolized everything ancient, the date it gave for Hermes was far older than the one it gave for Plato. In fact, the philosophers of the Renaissance considered themselves descendants of 3 great men. First, Moses, who gave the laws of God, then Plato, who gave the laws of men, while in between them in chronological order, Hermes, who joined the two together. And Pimandris, the title given to the book translated by Ficino in such a hurry, awaited eagerly by Cosimo on his deathbed, marks no smaller claim as its author. Anonymous in the original text, but thought to have been Hermes himself, describes his encounter with a being that is higher even to God. After I had given my response, this great being changed in appearance, and I saw an endless vision in which everything became light. And seeing what I saw, I came to love it. After a while, however, darkness arose separately and coiled itself from below like a serpent, turning into something of a watery nature. Out of it came a roar like the voice of fire, while from the light above, Logos Agios, the holy word, came down, touching the watery fire below. And Pimandris said to me, "Have you understood the meaning of this vision? I am the light that you saw over the watery darkness, and the holy word, who comes from the great mind, is the Son of God. And this you must understand above all else, that what sees and hears in you is the word of God, but the mind that understands is God himself." Wow! So what we call consciousness is the word of God. It's what God does in the field of time, while the mind that observes it is God himself. Following this primal cosmology, the Pimandris continues with the creation of man through an error, the mixing of immortal substances with matter. The great mind, the father of all, gave birth to anthropon, man, αυτό ίσον, equal to himself, with whom he fell in love, as God is always in love with his own likeness, and thus bestowed upon man all of his powers. In time, man wished to create something for himself, just like his father had done, and for that, God gave him permission to break through the crystalline sphere and go into the material plane, nature's watery surface over which God himself stood. As man looked down to these waters, nature smiled in love, seeing the true face of God reflected in man's face. But as man himself looked on this surface, he saw the form of God reflected back through his own image. Seeing this, man stretched his hands to touch God again, but as he did, nature stretched back, entangling herself with man as lovers do, eromenni garisan. And because of this error, the mixing of lower and higher natures, unlike any other creatures on earth, man is twofold in nature. In his body, being entangled with material nature, he is mortal, but in essence, as being equal to God, he is immortal. He who recognizes these truths in himself, Pimandris, the higher mind, concludes, can attain the greatest good. But he who loves the body that comes from error of desire goes into darkness and suffering and into the effects of death. We can only hope that Cosimo found what he was looking for, because Ficino, his protege, delivered on his promise and managed to complete his translation just before his patron died. We can imagine Cosimo, the founder of the celebrated Medici family of Florence, the city that would later be called the Athens of the North, reading these words on his deathbed, sensing, perhaps, the importance they would have for the future generations. Because despite the factual errors that were prevalent in the Renaissance, that dated these Hermetic texts thousands of years before they were actually written, their immense popularity left few of its great minds unaffected. In his notebook, Leonardo da Vinci credits Hermete Filosofo as one of his sources. And even though he was officially condemned by the Pope, the image of Hermes ultimately found its place even inside of a Christian church, the Duomo in Siena. In our secular age, of course, we'd like to think that beliefs such as the ones just retold were nothing but remnants of a darker age, and most can only have forgiveness for the likes of Ficino and Da Vinci for giving so much importance to its mystical content. But that would be misunderstanding the Renaissance, because just like with learning how to drive, one naturally moves towards the direction they're looking at. In this context, the reintroduction of Hermes Trismegistus in Europe stirred our gaze towards the idea that man can rise above his present condition through knowledge. Mystical at first, of course, but later to become scientific. The real significance of the Hermetic texts, then, as interpreted by the great minds of that period, was the forging of a new European consciousness, where, in contrast to the Middle Ages, Western man is no longer waiting fatalistically for the afterlife, but can actually pull himself up from his own bootstraps with a combination of these two great traditions, the Greek and the Jewish, of Moses and Plato, through the intermediary figure of Hermes. And perhaps it was this, more than any other reason, that Plato had to wait until the necessary link to Christianity was first established, a link through which all types of knowledge, mystical as well as scientific, can be united, not through their methods that appear to us so different, but through their ultimate goal, so well established in the Renaissance, to rise above the material plane through an act of pure creation and to touch God.